I'm Billy S, welcome back to the channel. Today we're ranking my top 15 bosses in Elden Ring. Did you miss part 1 where I ranked bosses 33 through 16? Click the card in the top right corner, or click the link in the description to check it out. No more yammering, let's get to it. My top 15 bosses in Elden Ring, ranked. And be sure to leave your thoughts in the comments below. If there's one boss that had the biggest negative reception from me last year, it would be the Elden Beast. The true final boss of the game fought after defeating Radagon, this graceful creature awaits those who would fix the Elden Ring. And at launch, this was, and still is, a controversial fight. And I do get it, you just fought one of the coolest 1v1s in the game, and suddenly Space Squid takes over. It's a complete tonal whiplash, even down to the mystical music being a complete 180 from Radagon's theme. The Elden Beast utilizes that classic annoying Soulsborne mechanic of running away from the player to the other side of the arena as well. It has magic attacks that can do significant damage, and need I discuss the Elden Stars move that got nerfed into the ground after so many complaints about how to handle it? That's one of the things this community can truly be proud of. Thank you so much for making my life significantly easier. Because that's how Elden Beast went this time, actually. All of my final boss deaths were to Radagon, and I managed to beat the Elden Beast on my first attempt. Stepping back and just trying to enjoy the fight for what it is, the Elden Beast gives you ample time to get hits in before it chooses to flee. Its sword swings are easily dodgeable, and the golden sword waves feel great to time correctly. The golden ring attack can be countered by running and jumping over the edges of the spell, which is a satisfying usage of the jump mechanic. I think the attack that summons the homing light arrows that you have to run from is a bit of a tired spell type, and as said, the Elden Stars that features a homing turret following you around isn't fun, but at least it's not killing me outright anymore. Elden Beast can only be so hard given it comes from another boss fight that is arguably much more difficult, so for its place in the game and with a fresh perspective on its moveset, I don't hate the Elden Beast anymore, and that goes for a lot of the late game Elden Ring boss fights. That first playthrough really soured me on the end game when in reality I just needed to get used to Elden Ring. Now I see the light, and Elden Beast's cosmic bullshit earns my number 15 spot. Still wish I could summon Torrent for this fight though. Next up, we have the headmistress of the Raya Lucaria Academy, Rennala, Queen of the Full Moon. This is a fight of two extremes, with the first half being a bland puzzle boss introduction that gives way to what could be seen as the best magic fight in all of Soulsborne. Immediately, this battle was eerie, what with the creepy school kids chanting a lullaby for their teacher, the way Rennala is completely disassociated from reality as she rebirths and rebirths and rebirths her students over and over again. The first phase is simple. You attack the kids with the glowing yellow aura, and upon killing 3 of them, Rennala falls to the ground so you can attack her. The kids you need to defeat will launch books at the player via telekinesis, so it's easy to keep track of who's who. The most danger you'll face is a stray falling chandelier that can easily one-shot you if you're not careful, as well as a powerful attack from Rennala where she births her students into projectiles that can launch at you through the furniture. But come here with any relative damage and Rennala will go down in 2 cycles, leading to her phase 2. Here, a defense mechanism placed by Ranni activates in order to save her mother's life, thank god or we wouldn't be able to respec, and she creates what is clearly a spirit summon of Rennala, but in her prime, a towering, powerful sorceress with confidence and clarity. Set to the backdrop of one of the most gorgeous boss arenas in the franchise, it puts Bloodborne's Moonside Lake to shame. The fight itself is fantastic, with you needing to avoid Rennala's various glintstone sorceries of all types. All the while, she twirls her staff like a baton and uses it to do surprisingly good melee damage, enough so that I had a death against her. I especially love her full moon spell. It's not hard to avoid, being this giant homing orb that explodes as it approaches you, but it looks so cool. Where the battle gets a little dicey though are her spirit summons. I'm not personally bothered by them, seeing as they vanish soon after appearing, but at the same time, she really picked 4 of the most obnoxious enemies to fight on top of her own magic. The wolves are self-explanatory, nobody likes wolves. The Bloodhound Knight is fast, and in the early game can pose a problem to ill-equipped players. The troll just takes up a lot of space, and of course, if you're unlucky, she'll summon a fucking dragon, which, you know what? Smart woman, I too would summon a dragon if I knew I was running low on health. Ultimately, it's the first phase of this fight that keeps it lower in my rankings. Had we just had phase 2 as the only portion of the fight and given her a little more health so she's not squishy, she would be the perfect mage fight, and I stand by that. Next up, we have another Shard Bearer as we take a look at one of the best balanced boss fights in Elden Ring, Rykard, Lord of Blasphemy. Once known as Praetor Rykard, he was host of a band of inquisitors who would torture and interrogate for information within the Volcano Manor. During the Shattering War, he became disillusioned with the gods, who he saw as abandoning his family, so rather than deal with the whole everyone fighting each other for power bullshit, he just decided he wanted to destroy the gods themselves, which gave him his title Lord of Blasphemy, further enhanced when he became one with the god-devouring serpent to gain more power. And when we arrive, we just see a giant bundle of serpent, and immediately I had Bloodborne Forbidden Woods flashbacks. But luckily, you have the Serpent Hunter weapon, the only thing capable of felling this beast. And unlike past fights like Yorm or the Storm King that utilized a similar gimmick, the Serpent Hunter has a complete moveset on top of its weapon art that is able to stun the boss. So you can tackle this fight in a ton of different ways while wielding the weapon. And as the fight is balanced around said spear, you're always going to have a tough but manageable time. The first phase exists. I find the lunges of the Great Serpent hard to read and constantly got caught in its grab attacks, which was frustrating, but I got better towards the end of my attempts. Really, it's phase 2 we're all here for. The transition cutscene is one of the most grotesque things I've ever seen, which is perfectly offset by the absolute campiness of Rykard's voice acting. Together we will devour the very gods. What a legend. Phase 2 is a true boss battle of epic proportions, featuring an absolutely stellar Blasphemous OST, where the violins, the choir, and the opera singer are cooking with the flames of hell itself. Which is rather fitting given what happens midway through the fight, with the attack where Rykard summons a fiery orange sky and then rains homing skulls down on the player. It's one of the most intimidating moments from any Soulsborne boss, and it really adds to the oppressive nature of the battle, as you have to duck and weave, avoiding the explosions and praying it ends soon so you can continue your assault. The only issue I had with the fight, aside from Phase 1 being a bit boring in comparison to Phase 2, was the arena. It's large and in charge, which was practically required for a fight of this size and scope, yet I found myself constantly getting caught on pillars or backed against the walls as I tried to escape that ever-approaching lava pool. I just suck at spatial awareness, and that's entirely a me problem, not a problem with the fight itself. But hey, it's my opinion. You can easily make the case for Rykard being a top 5 boss in the game though, and I'd love to hear everyone's thoughts on him in the comments. If I could just take a few moments of your time, I'm trying to reach 10,000 subscribers by the end of 2023. I don't know if we can do it, but I'd love to try. Look at how many of my viewers aren't subscribed. Let's rectify that. Be sure to parry that subscribe button so you can stay up to date on my weekly content. Back to the video. Next up, we have the first real challenge of the game, Margit the Fell Omen, waiting outside of Stormvale Castle for any lowly tarnished to make their approach. As we know, Margit is the alternate identity of Morgott, the Omen King, and with this name, he led the Knight's cavalry across the lands between. It's safe to assume he became a well-known name for his defense of Leyndell, even if nobody knew he was truly the king. And now we face his might, and for an early game fight, he is insane. The first half of his battle starts off relatively simple, with a slower, more deliberate moveset that can be blocked or dodged through without much issue. He has a few fast attacks that can catch you off guard, but nothing that isn't manageable. It's honestly on the same level as something like Udex Gundyr, but with a few faster attacks thrown in for good measure. I really enjoy it, and feel it's a great way to teach the player about his attack patterns. Then the second phase hits. For as much as I adore Margit, the level of difficulty between the first half of his fight and the second half is just a little too much for me. Suddenly, he's conjuring light weapons that you can block, but you'll take chip damage, and his combo strings get longer and longer. In Elden Ring, you're encouraged to find openings within boss combos to get your damage, as you can't always rely on the Dark Souls 3 method of waiting until a combo ends before getting your hits in. This is because most bosses just don't get tired, and Margit is no obsession. He becomes incredibly aggressive and oppressive in a way that would cause many new players to quit, because I even struggled with him after doing the entirety of Limgrave and the Weeping Peninsula. Of course, you could use the secret path around the castle to go straight to Liurnia, but I'd rather not overlevel for a fight if I can help it. I just think Margit could have toned down his moveset slightly so a single mistake doesn't cost you your entire health bar. But I also can't deny that the fast-paced moveset allowed me to get more accustomed to some of Elden Ring's new rules. After all, if you can beat Margit, you can beat Stormveil, and I think it was purposeful that they made him a much harder boss than the actual Shardbearer in the castle. Fitting, given we know Margit is much stronger than he shows in this fight. I also think it was a bit evil to make the arena have bottomless pits on either side, as while I know gravity is a Dark Souls classic mechanic we have to deal with, placing it in the first proper boss of the game was just cruel towards new players who'll have to learn about positioning on top of Margit's insane combo game. I have a lot of love for him as a character, and I would rank him higher, but I just can't help feeling he's a little too overtuned for the average player at that point in the game. And I'm not a fan of how many delayed attacks he has in his kit. You don't chuck delayed attacks at new players who haven't even developed the muscle memory to handle regular attacks. But hey, 12th place is still pretty damn good. And look at that! Following Margit is the man of the castle himself, Godric the Grafted. A fan favourite in the community. I'm gonna get so many comments calling me whack or insane or stupid for not including him in my top 10, and I hear you. I'm gonna ignore you, but I hear you. Godric is the best first Shardbearer to face, having an almost perfect moveset that can be learned and exploited with relative ease, while also being a genuine threat to the player if you don't know what you're in for. There's a reason this man was slapped on all the Elden Ring marketing pre-release. They knew they had something special with this horrific grafted abomination of a lord. Just the shot of him holding out his hand and realizing that's not the correct amount of fingers. While his bombastic theme plays in the background, you have to deal with a host of wind-based abilities that have Godric rolling around at the speed of sound, in ways you wouldn't expect from a man that large. While his large, bulky axe swings give you ample opportunity to dodge or block your way through them. His wombo combo is perhaps his deadliest move to me, as the reach on this last 2 forward slams are always further than you'd expect. And I'd be remiss if I didn't mention his Stormcaller ability, where he drums up flourishes of air around him incredibly quickly. It suffers from the same issue that the Godskin Noble belly attack has, where it comes out so fast that it's almost impossible to react to, which really sucks for no damage runs. But the rest of his kit is so fair that it balances out, especially when Godric decides to chop off his own arm and fist a dragon neck. You do you, I'm not here to kink shame, but I will say that a man suddenly having a flamethrower is pretty terrifying, and admittedly, reminds me of Link equipping a flame emitter to his shield with the fuse ability in Tears of the Kingdom. His phase 2 is similar to his phase 1, yet a majority of his attacks are now imbued with flame, and he has a few new ones he can break out involving his new appendage. The most deadly is his Striding Flame, where he points his flamethrower ahead and slowly approaches you. They have a surprisingly long reach, and this move killed me quite a few times in my original playthrough. There's also his Bear Witness ability, where he drags his arm around him in a circle before thrusting it upwards to rain fire on the battlefield. Extremely cool, but dodgeable like most of his fire attacks by rolling or getting behind his back. His last notable move I love is his Kneel ability, where he slams his axe into the ground and creates shockwaves. This is a great tutorial for jumping through attacks, as if you time it correctly, you can jump over the shockwaves and maybe even get a cheeky jump attack in yourself. Otherwise you can just run away. Running usually works in Elden Ring for creating distance. It's such a fun moveset, and I really love the waltz that his OST takes you on while you dodge and block around him. It's why I don't even mind that Godefroy exists, because getting to refight a harder Phase 1 Godric is worth it, even if it's so damn stupid lore-wise. He just misses out on my top 10 because I found the above fights more memorable for me during my recent playthrough, and that's all there is to it. We've made it to the top 10, and starting us off, we have the first half of Elden Ring's final boss, Radagon of the Golden Order. Now, some may wonder why I rank him and Elden Beast as separate entities, despite one being required to face the other, and my answer is, because I can. Work, Diva! Radagon is a fantastic climactic fight, and on his own could carry the mantle of an Elden Ring final boss. You could have given him a second phase instead of bringing a space squid into it, and I'd probably be hyping him up as much as I did DS3's Soul of Cinder. This man is brutal. His hammer is desperate to connect with your face, and of the Soulsborne final bosses, I'd say he's the most passive-aggressive out of the gate. When Radagon hits, he hits hard, but when he's not attacking, he's scarily calm? Like a statue that observes, only to go through the motions and deliberately strike you where it hurts the most. His attacks of course have some tricky delays to learn initially, and once he starts bringing holy magic into the mix, things get that much more intense. It starts off with a few delayed AoEs on the floor, but by the end of the fight, you're avoiding sigils that can drain your health, various hammer slams with AoE effects that get larger as the fight progresses, and because he's a Soulsborne final boss, he has a magical spear attack that is imbued with holy that I cannot figure out the timing for the life of me. His grab is terrifying, and the timing is so delayed that you'll most likely panic roll multiple times until you fall into it. And God forbid you handle his Elden Shattering attack where he slams the ground 3 times with ever-increasing AoE effects that form the Elden Ring itself. The visual flair for Radagon is insane, and you truly see how imbued with the Golden Order he is and how dangerous that makes him. Oh, and he can teleport, so nowhere is safe. And yet his moveset is incredibly readable, which is good given he's just the first half of a much larger fight. But I appreciate that Radagon ultimately encourages a more aggressive playstyle. As long as you're attacking him and trading damage, you can take him down fairly quickly, as I did with my last run of the fight. Play passive and he'll outdamage you and overwhelm you with his far-reaching hard-hitting attacks. All set to the main theme of Elden Ring. I fucking love when climactic boss fights incorporate a leitmotif of a significant theme from the game, and using quite literally the main menu theme, the piece we knew leading up to launch, they knew what they were doing. My one gripe with Radagon though is that due to his statuesque physique, I never got the sense that he was reacting to any of my attacks. Which is fine, I get the point, he's, I think, made of stone, but I'd like some feedback every now and then given every other enemy in the game has some form of stagger animation. But honestly, that's the only negative, and it's completely subjective. I say this at the end of every entry, but he only ranks this low because I enjoy the above fights more. Oh! And his Holy Spear fan projectile can fuck off. I don't like them, they come out fast. Haha! Justification for a 10th place spot, let's go! Time for the spiciest take of all time. Nobody is agreeing with me on this, but that's what makes it my list. Say hello to my number 9, Elima of the Briar, the boss of the Shaded Castle, but I'm slightly cheating here because I'm including the bell-bearing hunter fights as part of this entry, as it's literally just the same guy. If anything, it would be more applicable to say that this spot goes to the Dragon Barrow bell-bearing hunter for delivering a fight that ended up being the second hardest in the game for me based on number of attempts. But I'm getting ahead of myself. First things first, the Mirai Executioner's Sword is one of the coolest weapons in the entire game. Able to be infused with energy so that Elima can swing it around like he's using the Force. Whether it's short range or long range, he has attacks that can shut you down, but are dodgeable with the right timing. The issue most people have with Elima is how aggressive he is. You don't really get traditional ways to heal, as he can hit you from so far away that you have to make your own openings during his combos to get those safe moments. Otherwise, you'll be on the end of his Force Swing Force combo, his Corkscrew Dive attack, or his Shield Charge that has a shockingly high range. My advice would be to stick as close to Elima as possible, because his options at close range are easier to telegraph, and you're less likely to see him using his abilities. but you can also bait out his shield slam attack, which most of the time will give you an opportunity to heal. You just have to beware, as sometimes he can follow the slam up with an AoE that's caught me off guard multiple times. Can we talk about how extra this guy's armor set is? I love a good piece of armor, but when the barbed wire that runs through the entire suit just adds a level of badassery, ugh, so good. Even more when you learn that Ellimer's backstory is of a criminal who stayed his own execution, and I have to assume, slaughtered the entire house of Mirai. His battle in the shaded castle is cool, with the arena just giving me very Game of Thrones vibes for some reason, but it's his Dragon Barrow fight that sticks with me. He does so much damage in that variant that the only way to win is to learn his moveset. There's no cheesing him in that encounter, and as I killed every single boss in Elden Ring during my footage playthrough, he had to go down. I took 14 attempts at various points in my playthrough to defeat his hardest variant, but if we include all 5 of his boss fights, I spent 22 total attempts against him, and it was probably the hardest field boss outside of the Deathrite birds. A very well done for him for making such an impression on me, and allowing me to really appreciate his fight once I got his moveset down. That he made his way into my top 10 when I had no intention of letting him into part 2 of this video series before my playthrough? That says everything, doesn't it? Okay, let's do this. Not even making my top 5, Malenia Blade of Miquella, the optional super boss of Elden Ring. Hidden at the depths of the Halig tree past a horde of some of the toughest enemies in the game, she chills in a beautiful flower field awaiting the return of her brother, who will never come, slowly losing her mind to the rot inside of her. And when she sees you, well, she knows what Tarnished are here to do, and so she announces that she is Malenia Blade of Miquella, and she has never known defeat. On paper, this had the potential to be the best fight in the game bar none, because not only does she have a fantastic visual design in both of her phases, but she hits that sweet spot for me where you get to duel a character on your level. No beasts or craziness, just a skilled swordswoman versus myself. It's so frustrating for me because she is so close to being perfect. The smallest of tweaks to the way her moveset works could make her the best boss to test my mettle against. And I do understand for many players, she already is that. And you know what? That's fabulous. I'm so happy that so many of you can find enjoyment in Malenia as she is currently. But I have to be honest, Malenia Spirit Summonless with no bleed was simultaneously the hardest thing I have ever done in any Soulsborne game, and the most miserable I have ever been in any Soulsborne game. Because she has this talent of making you feel like you're making progress, only to snatch it away in the most unfair manner possible. There is nothing worse than getting her over halfway down her health in phase 1, and then she just decides to waterfowl dance 3 times in the span of 50 seconds, regaining all that health and making me feel useless in the process. Despite the fact that I'm a fucking good Soulsborne player, and I've proven that by going back through this series and defeating every boss in every game. I've seen that progression over the last half a year, only to be halted by Malenia. She humbles the best players, but is so soul-crushing to fight. When I beat her this time around, I told myself I never wanted to do this fight again, regardless of how much I appreciate and respect the mechanics behind it, and the way that most of her moveset is so fucking fun to play around. So here's what I would change for Malenia to balance her fight, without taking away that edge she has as this endgame difficult superboss, because I want to make it clear, I am okay with dying a ton, as long as there's a sense of progress that's being made. For her phase 1, I would stagger how many times Waterfowl Dance can be used. Have it triggered once at around 70% health, then once at 40%, and then once at 10%. Don't make it this random attack she can pull out at a moment's notice with no warning, forcing you to become Ultra fucking Instinct Goku if you want to dodge every part of the attack. I shouldn't be forced to learn an extremely unintuitive dodge mechanic to deal with the first Waterfowl flurry, because the second and third parts of the attack are easily dodged, it's just that initial burst that's the worst. I shielded through it because I couldn't get the dodge timing down and thought, you know what, I'll just deal with the fact that she's going to regen some health. If I play well, I can play around it. Secondly, I would cut her life drain from phase 1 and only have it applicable in phase 2. It makes sense that in the second phase she can life drain because she's embraced the Scarlet Rot, and you can make the case that every time she hits us, the rot saps from us and powers her up. In fact, I wouldn't change phase 2 at all. I think it's perfect the way it is, because a majority of her moveset is just a stronger variant of phase 1, and the toughest part aside from a few of the new super attacks that can be dodged through is figuring out what she's doing when there's so much visual flair on the screen because of the butterflies. Asia O'Hara found gagging. I understand people would then complain that phase 1 could be beaten too quickly without her life drain, but I think that's a worthwhile sacrifice. After all, I'm saying this having taken 141 attempts at her this playthrough, on top of watching my boyfriend beat her last year with a fucking great shield over 4 days. I've seen this fight enough to feel like I know where it could be improved while keeping the spirit of the fight alive. I want to adore Malenia. I want to fight her again. But that phase 1 is so brutal for no reason, because you could have a few runs where you make it to phase 2 without issue, but then she'll just fuck you up in phase 1 for 10 to 15 attempts because she's got such a high skill ceiling if you're not trying to abuse her poise. It's such a divisive fight with mechanics that do border on unfair, and I don't agree with the "it's not a mandatory fight so this level of difficulty is okay" argument, because I'm okay with extremely difficult fights. But there needs to be fairness to it. I don't want to fight unfair battles. At the very least, you don't have to change much for phase 1, but let a 100% physical damage reduction shield block the life drain in phase 1 specifically. Throw us a bone. I'm only this dramatic because I went through every emotion with Malenia, and I just thought, this isn't what I love about FromSoft bosses. I don't want to feel miserable the entire time. And yet, beating Malenia is the best feeling in the world. The serotonin that shoots through you will fuel a person for years. And I'm so glad I did it spiritless, because that's an achievement I can be proud of. And I love working a moveset and finding my openings to counter and attack, and that's what Malenia does best. But I can't rank her any higher in good conscience when I feel so strongly about her difficulty and her balance. I apologize that this entry was less an analysis of the boss and more just me needing to vent after the trauma, but I hope you can all see I really am trying to come from a place of love and respect. She could have been the best fight in Soulsborne if her phase 1 was just more approachable. I'd love to hear how you would improve Malenia's boss fight while still keeping that difficult edge. Leave your thoughts down below while I go to therapy. Anyway, let's get the 1-2 punch out of the way. Hoaraloo Warrior, also known as Godfrey the First Elden Lord, is at number 7. I told you guys in part 1 that I'm not as high on the Godfrey fight as the fanbase generally is, though I do see why people love it. From the introduction, where you find Godfrey kneeling beside the corpse of his beloved son Morgott, to the way his own guidance of grace is leading him towards you. You are each other's final boss to determine who will be able to enter the Erd Tree and face off against Radagon for the title of Elden Lord. Will it be the man who originated the title, attempting to pull a Sandra Diaz Twine and be a 2-time Elden Lord? Or will you, the little tarnish that could, slay this foe and create your own legacy? As I explained in the Goldfrey fight from last video, I think Phase 1 Godfrey is fantastic. Here his moveset is expanded with more axe swings, more ground slams, more everything really. His aggression is amped up, and so too must yours, as you duck and block through attacks, making your own openings as you go. It's clear that Godfrey is holding back though. He's not easy by any means, but after an entire game of fighting people like him, you get a decent handle on how to dodge a big axe. So when he reaches half health and snaps the jaw of his blessed lion Sarosh, his bloodlust is released and he becomes, quite literally, a Final Fantasy monk. Hoaraloo Warrior. You know, I have to wonder if him and Nefeliloo Warrior are related. They have the same last name. warrior. Such a dumb joke. Now, this phase, personality-wise, is fantastic. I love the sheer level of aggression, and the wrestling vibes just make me laugh. It's such a dynamic change from the calculated, calm demeanor of Godfrey, and I'm also a sucker for massive personality shifts. But from a gameplay perspective, I found this phase so weird, because it feels like every one of his attacks is on an unnatural delay. Now, I'm not against delayed attacks unlike some people in the Souls fandom, and if you're gonna use them at the endgame boss, it makes complete sense. It's just, because all of them are throws and grabs, it feels odd. I just want to rematch him and really try to understand his moveset, because I don't feel like I fully jived with it this time around, and I know with more practice I could enjoy it further. But I appreciate that they're really trying to stop you panic rolling, even if I didn't listen. My only complaint about Hoaraloo and Godfrey is his stomps. He stomps so much in both phases, honestly, and it's the one attack I could never really get a handle on. I just sort of had to take them and feel bad about myself because his foot had my name on it. I know you're supposed to jump, I know that, but these complaints are from someone who has yet to master the fight. I won, don't get me wrong, I beat him, I just don't feel like I mastered him. I don't have the same connection that everyone else seems to have. And I do feel a bit weird because of that. I'm usually on the ball with these things, but this time I don't get it. I want to get it. Let me in your Hoaraloo club, please, fandom. Tell me why you love him so much, so I might be able to understand and relate. So, 7th place is where he stands until I can connect with him on an emotional level. So technically, the Godskin Apostle isn't a mandatory fight or tied to any achievements, but it just felt wrong ranking the Godskin Noble solo and not including the Apostle, especially when I think good old Lonk over there is one of the best enemies in the game. Both from an aesthetic perspective, looking straight out of a fucked up Assassin's Creed, and also from a gameplay perspective. Whether you fight the variant in the Windmill Village or the one beneath the Divine Tower of Caelid, they both fit as a tough yet fair boss fight of their respective areas. While the Windmill one is my personal favourite for the build-up towards the fight through the village, and the fact it drops the Godskin Peeler, the Caelid version is way harder and really tests your resolve. Of all the Godskin fights, I feel like the OST fits the Apostle the best. As the choir starts up and you approach the top of the Windmill Village, and out steps our long, long man. That's an old reference, Jesus. The first half of the fight is pretty standard. Fighting any enemy with a Twin Blade moveset can be dangerous, as they've twirled and swirled their whole lives. And there's a very specific move they can use where they whirl their Twin Blade like a fan, and it's caught me off guard multiple times. The rest of the moveset is your standard fare though, aside from a few pokes from the bottom of the blade that can catch you off guard. I'd expect that from the Noble's Rapier, not the Apostle's Twin Blade. But let's be real, we all love this fight for the second phase, when the Apostle becomes a literal human slinky and begins sliding and stretching around the boss arenas with some insane moves. They can stretch towards you to attack and either retract themselves back to their starting spot, or just launch the rest of their body towards you to follow up. The Twin Blade helicopter move gets 10 times deadlier now the Apostle can follow you all around the room with their big stretch. And perhaps the most deadly move if you're not prepared, the Black Flame Tornado, the signature move of the Godskin Peeler that I took full advantage of in the late game for a bit of extra power here and there. I find the second phase actually easier than the first phase, but it's so chaotic in the best way, unlike the Noble whose second phase is filled with irritating attacks that feel hard to dodge. The Apostle easily gets the edge here. I'd rather fight a boss that ends up being easy in the long run, but has a dynamic moveset to avoid, block through, or counter, than anything else, and the Apostle is just that type of boss. It just scratches an itch. I'll never skip one of their fights if I can help it, because they just please me so much. And I put them above Melania and Hoaraloo. I'm gonna get roasted. It's official, we're at the top 5. And I really love the last fights on these lists. There's no negatives for me, just personal preference. So starting us off, let's head to Crumbling Farum Azula and break the heart of Malekith, the Black Blade. I always try to do the Deathroot quest before fighting this boss, as it gives you a slight difference in the opening dialogue, where Malekith sounds pretty betrayed by you showing up to take destined death. But it also adds a personal touch to this fight, as he's one of the few friendly creatures you've encountered in the lands between. In his Beast Clergyman phase, it's the same battle you faced in Dragon Barrow after you feed him his 4th Deathroot, only this time he hits harder, but you're more equipped to handle him. I found this phase required a lot of precise dodging and using the pillars around the room to stop some of his more brutal, bestial attacks. The Rock Sling was definitely the easiest to take advantage of, while the Beast Claws made me nervous because the damage they do is brutal. A part of me wishes we could just skip the Clergyman fight and go straight to Malekith, but I understand why they did what they did in this case. Fighting Malekith from the start with a full health bar could be considered too much for a mandatory boss, given one of his main abilities directly affects your maximum health, and his Destined Death Flame effect can sap your HP. It's a delicate balance that had to be made, but one that they did the best they could with. Once Malekith reveals the Black Blade and his sleek Dark Knight looking design, 1,000 furries swooned, on top of the hundreds of thousands who were still swooning over Blythe. And then Malekith starts doing my favourite, flippy shit. I don't know what I was expecting, but an incredibly mobile, almost Spider-Man-esque movement style was not it. But I love it. Malekith hits hard, but has a surprisingly small moveset to learn that just happens to have a lot of combo potential. If you gained the Blasphemous Claw from the Recusant Invasion event, you can use it to parry Malekith at the end of certain combos, which leaves him very vulnerable for a few brief moments to get some damage in. I debated on whether I wanted to use this for the playthrough and decided not to rely on it, but to use it if the chance arose because that footage is always helpful. And it clinched me the win. There's nothing cooler than watching Malekith plunge the sword into the ground, explode and backflip before charging you again with another swing. This is a fight I look forward to now when I play, and is another one I need to apologize for because I didn't enjoy it in my original run. Then I saw my boyfriend body Malekith very quickly last summer and thought, did I really just suck at Elden Ring? And the answer was yes. Yes, I did. And now I don't. A well-deserved top 5 placement for a beast with such tragic lore. Malekith deserved so much better than what Marika left him to deal with because she was one manipulative bitch. Of the rest of the bosses on this list, none has a more intimidating entrance than Dragonlord Placidusax. Waking up in this vast arena in the middle of the tornado, away from time itself, while a giant dragon hangs in stasis, lightning and thunder flashing in the distance. That's what I call intimidating. And Placidusax matches that intimidation with an amazing OST that escalates dynamically throughout the fight with an intensity befitting of an ancient lord. It truly feels like you're fighting something completely out of your league, and there's a keen awareness that this isn't full-strength Placidusax. He once had 5 heads, and he's whooping your ass with 2. The first portion of the fight is fairly standard, but you'll need to be very careful about your positioning. You see, Placidusax has the usual claw swipe and slam combos you'd expect from any enemy of this scale, but he also has a large variety of fire breath attacks that vary depending on where he's aiming. I found myself tanking a lot of fire damage because I was never 100% sure whether the breath attack he was using was coming my way, or if I was positioned safely. I tend to stick towards his back half when attacking, but he very much shoots fire all around him, so you're not safe anywhere. Then there's the red lightning strikes that appear throughout the arena, with 3 sequentially targeting the player. You of course need to leave the area of effect to avoid getting struck, which is simple enough, but when he combos this with his claws and flames, it can be difficult to multitask. The real challenge and excitement though comes when you get him to his second phase. He'll vanish into thin air and storm clouds will appear somewhere on the edges of the arena, denoting where he's going to swoop in from. There are multiple variations of this attack with the storm clouds moving in phase 3, and it feels great to dodge his dive bomb. Staying locked onto Placidusax will also help because he'll start teleporting and slamming his claws down, which he'll do 3 to 4 times before going back to his usual antics. I know a lot of people who struggle with this phase, but as I said, if you lock on, you'll be able to follow him when he teleports, which makes dodging the claws so much easier. One attack though that is just so cool is the Bolt of Placidusax. He'll begin charging up a giant thunderbolt, and your only option is to run. But what's so cool about this attack is that when it hits and the arena just explodes, the music cuts out because the impact was that powerful. This is the only boss in the game who has the power to destroy his own music. Holy fuck. And like Papa Midir before him, Placidusax also has a final bombastic attack where he'll do his dive bomb ability before breathing flames in your direction that turn into fucking Midir lasers that will kill you if they hit you. From Software knows we love a good laser avoidance challenge, and I think more From Software boss fights need to have bosses who are hard-coded to use insane once-a-battle last resort abilities at the end. It bookends the fight in a satisfying way and gives the player one last bit of adrenaline before the final blow. Is Placidusax my favourite dragon in the series? You'll have to wait and see for my upcoming Soulsborne dragon ranking video to find out. Taking our bronze medal, we have the most problematic gay in the world, Mohg, Lord of Blood. The man who wishes to become Miquella's consort. I'm sorry, there is nothing heterosexual about the way he holds his hand there. Mohg is so fucked, and also so little brother-coded that I can't help but feel for the guy as the youngest in my family too. If he just had a better childhood, you know, not him and his brother being cast out from the family due to their lineage, and him having a very clear inferiority complex that he's trying to overcompensate for by starting one hell of a dynasty, he could have been good fun. Bet he'd have a good time at a pride parade. Instead, he becomes the Lord of Blood and one of two optional endgame shard bearers. I much prefer him to Melania. Now, I'm saying some risky things by complimenting Mohg because my boyfriend does not like him. He couldn't handle the sheer amount of flaming blood and bleed buildup from the second phase, and he didn't like that the only way to counter Mohg's nihil is to use the special tier in the Flask of Wondrous Physic. As for me, that doesn't bother me quite so much. If anything, it's a slight handicap that forces you to only rely on one optional effect in your flask instead of two. Though the issue of course is that said special tier is only found via an invasion in the Altus Plateau that can be very easily missed. And that's why Mohg is number 3 and not 2 or 1, because his biggest attack's counter is so well hidden, and if you're not doing it with said counter, you're gonna have a miserable time during the phase transition. Everything else is fantastic though. His phase 1 is simple enough. If you fought Sewer Mohg beneath Leyndell, you know how to handle Lord of Blood phase 1. Although I really got in my head regarding his delayed trident attacks. Those overhead swings take just a bit longer than you'd expect to come out, and I paid the price throughout my battles with the demigod. Of course, his nihil is iconic, it's been memed to death, and it's one of the coolest non-cutscene phase transitions in the game. Just the way he becomes this angel of darkness once those wings sprout, it's like fighting Satan, or at least what an edgy teens version of Satan would be, which is very fitting for Mohg. His second phase is intense, there's a lot of blood flame, and you're punished for not being aggressive, because the more you back off, the more blood flame will get chucked about, and the more the arena gets covered. The closer you are, the less you have to worry about, as most of the blood will end up far behind you or around you. All of his moves are telegraphed, and as long as you memorize which moves have which type of blood spray, you can use the arena to your advantage and not get boxed into a corner. Tell that to past me though, because I struggled the moment the momentum shifted from myself to Mohg. It's hard to get back on track once he takes control of the pace of the fight, but he is completely beatable, and I think my build was very well suited to his fight. I just love that the boss arena is something you can see from near the beginning of the game when you enter Shifra for the first time, because I remember seeing Mohgwyn Palace in the distance and thinking, I want to go there. And we could! Mohg is a fight that gets better with each playthrough, and I look forward to the day I can nail his moveset and truly do the bloody tango with him while listening to that absolutely iconic OST. Oh. Well, there's 2 bosses left on the list. Both shard bearers, both iconic for different reasons, But just missing out on my gold medal, but so deserving of the silver, is Star Scourge Radahn. One does not simply walk onto the Wailing Dunes and expect to breeze through this fight. Radahn was the strongest of the demigods during the Shattering War, but after his infamous battle against Melania, he was corrupted by the Scarlet Rot and is now a harrowing shell of his former self, howling at the sky and waiting for death. So it is that Radahn's followers set up a festival with the intention of honouring the life of himself. For if he is slain, their purpose is fulfilled, and if he isn't slain, they get to bask in the glory of their commander and his power for longer. Now, the intended way to fight Radahn in the festival is to summon your compatriots throughout the fight. Blythe, Alexander, Theralina, Lionel, Patches, all here to help you in battle. So why are they not in my footage? Because I didn't use them! With the intended method, you get this epic festival where Radahn fights your forces and you act as an opposing commander, which is already pretty cool. It's like doing an MMO raid boss. But this time around, I fought Radahn on my own. I wanted to test myself, having seen other YouTubers and players do this exact feat. And I love that Radahn is designed in such a way that it is entirely possible to fight him solo. His attacks hit hard, don't get me wrong, but you have a good amount of time to heal between him, and if you stay close, you'll often avoid some of his more aggressive swings and combos. He still has a series of moves to learn, and once he starts breaking out the gravity magic, you have to be careful of some of his larger slams and AoEs. Plus, if you're attacking solo, the best point to hit is his poor horse Leonard. Love the lore that Radahn wasn't willing to let his horse go, and thus learned gravity magic so he could continue to ride his baby steed. It's so beautiful. But it's that phase 2 transition, the best in the game. He launches into the air, the sky darkens as night passes over the lands between, and out of the corner of your eye, you spot something on the horizon. And a moment later, your body is splattered across the sands. I have no idea how to avoid this meteor solo. I had to resort to chugging my physic flask and using the opaline bubble tier to negate the damage. You do what you have to do. And then phase 2 begins. His attacks are more aggressive and his gravity magic is more dangerous. He can summon rocks to throw at you from a distance, and these one-shot me without fail until I remembered I could just hop on Torrent for this fight and safely outrun them. Then it was only a matter of time before I took him down because my DPS was pretty good. But just the style, the flair, the brutality of Radahn's kit, it leaves such an impression, especially when we get so much backstory into his character and the festival, so when we defeat him and allow the stars back into motion, it hits hard. Radahn has an amazing fight, but his lore doesn't specifically tie in with the player that much, instead being a focus for Ranni and her questline. And that's the one thing my number 1 fight has that just beats out the Star Scourge. So let's go meet him, shall we? Our gold medalist, quite fittingly, goes to the one person wholly devoted to the Golden Order to the bitter end. Morgott, the Omen King of Leyndell. Now let's start with the obvious. I mentioned that Radahn didn't have much connection to the player, whereas Morgott is effectively your rival. Ever since you encounter him as Margit, you know that he's still alive thanks to the monologue after his defeat. And I remember in my first playthrough, when you're on the outskirts of Leyndell and you can get attacked by Margit again, I never saw it. I just heard the dialogue of Margit spotting me, but I never saw the boss because I just rode on by before he transformed. I thought he was just spying on me from the capital. So I was sitting there thinking, what the fuck was that? Am I gonna fight him again? And then it slowly clicked in my head who the king probably was. When I reached the throne room, my suspicions were then confirmed, and this started to feel personal. One of the most memorable early game fights, and the character was back, revealing himself as Morgott the Omen King, and suddenly I was getting a rematch, but now I'm the one with all the power, because we were suddenly on even ground. It's no secret that Morgott's boss fight is woefully simple in terms of his HP. You're unlikely to die more than a few times, and in my case, I didn't die once. But I was brought to the end of my healing. Not that I was complaining, because now that I have an expanded kit and Morgott has a more diverse moveset, it felt more fair than when I fought Margit. He has all the moves you expect from his original form, but once you do enough damage, his curse begins to taint the thrones, and yeah, he loses it. He gains the ability to launch a rain of holy swords. He gains a holy spear that is absolutely devastating if it lands. It can launch him across the arena in an instant. There are geysers across the battlefield that can explode with his curse, and his cursed sword takes on that property we all know and love at this point, a From Software staple, Blood Flame. Like Lady Maria and the Abyss Watchers before him, his blood boils over and you have to time your dodges to avoid the swing and the blood. Ironically, he's more similar to Moog than they might think, given he's resorting to such a tactic. This man is like the main character of Fate Unlimited Blade Works, able to summon god knows how many different weapons to attack you, to the point where you'd think it would be overwhelming, but it's honestly not. I respect the armory, jack of all trades, master of none, but will still fuck you up. There's just something striking about Morgott when you finally get the killing blow, and he doesn't dissolve. His body rests there, giving you one last monologue before passing on so that Godfrey can find him later. A truly tragic end for a man who just wanted to do good for his order, even if said order shunned him and his brother for their curse. Elden Ring is, as usual, filled with tragedy, but by becoming Elden Lord, we prove Morgott's final words wrong and hopefully bring about a better world, assuming you didn't pick the Dung Eater ending. Morgott just has such a unique moveset, a real personal connection to the player, and some tragic lore that makes his battle so special to me. And there was just no other option. Morgott, the Omen King, is my favorite battle in Elden Ring. Oh boy, that was a rough video in the middle there. I got very emotional over a couple of bosses, and I hope that was entertaining to an extent. That is the last of my solo game boss rankings. The next time I rank bosses, it's going to be Soulsborne wide, baby. That being said, be sure to tune in next week where I rank the areas of Elden Ring. I'm pretty excited for that. And thank you so much to everyone who has stuck around and watched all of these ranking videos. By no means am I done. I have so many ideas for the Soulsborne rankings and for other video games too, so be sure to parry that subscribe button for more content every week. My socials are on screen now. Feel free to follow where you feel comfortable. I recommend my Twitter. And a thank you to all of my patrons over on Patreon. You guys are awesome. I really hope that all of my Patreons are still subscribed, because I have to use the graphic from June because I'm not home right now because I'm on holiday, so that'll be awkward otherwise. But yeah, I'll see you guys next time. Adios.